Claudia, so I got one bite of salad. That was really good. Claudia mentioned the building, and for years when I've talked to new groups, I have explained why it is I have the same name as a big building. I tell people when I came back here and started practicing law, I went away to college law school, and then I came home to Arizona, and I was not fully prepared for what it was going to mean to have the same name as the building. I actually broke ground for the building. But I would tell people my name, and they would say things like, "Are you related to the building?" It doesn't make a lot of sense. I was always inclined to answer that, yes, but I'm just a little Circle K myself. Or, were you named after the building, as Claudia said, which I always thought, who would do that to their kid, just randomly name them after them. The best response I ever got was I called somewhere and I left a message, would you tell them that Grady Gammage called, and the loan on the other line, and the line said, yeah, right, I'm Turf Paradise. And for years I've been telling that joke, and Turf Paradise is going to go away one of these days, because horse racing is on the decline, but people won't know it anymore. The real story is, and actually my father was the first member of the family to come to Arizona, but he came the year after statehood. He came to enroll at the U of A, and when he was told he had tuberculosis, was in Arkansas, and wrote to George W. Hunt, the governor of Arizona, to ask if there was a university in the new state of Arizona. And Governor Hunt wrote back and said, yes, I have admitted you, come on out. So he came out and enrolled and stayed ever since. I came along relatively late in his life. He was 59 when I was born. So he had died before the building got built. So there's the whole story, you got that right. On the strength of having the same name as a big pink building, I was, in the 90s, elected to the Central Arizona Project Board of Directors. And I say on the strength of having the name as the same name as a big pink building because if you think about the ballot when you get it next time, you go down the list, you vote for offices you know about and care about, and somewhere down near the bottom of the ballot, after you have voted for state mine inspector and whatever else is there, and school boards and everything else, you'll find the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. And historically, nobody even bothered to campaign for the CAWCD board. It was populated largely by retired politicians, former governors, that sort of thing. And I was, and a lot, the only people who really were very interested were farmers, because a lot of the CAP water initially was going to farming. So I was recruited to run for that board on the strength of having a name that people might recognize. And indeed, I did nothing. I didn't kiss a baby, I didn't spend a dime, I didn't make a speech, I did nothing. And I got 260,000 votes the first time I ran because people got there and they thought, oh, I've heard of that name, let's vote for that. Of such things do we make public policy in Arizona. It's kind of thin, but, and I got on the board, and I am not a water lawyer, I am a land use lawyer. I primarily represent real estate developers beseeching people like Claudia, when she was on the city council, to please approve that project so we can build things. So I knew a lot about urban growth and development, but not a lot about water issues. And I got on the CAP board, and I had no idea what they were talking about. Water is encrusted with acronyms, so people talk in things like scrub accounting, which means separable cost remaining benefit accounting. And all kinds of other arcane phrases. And they talk about the law of the river. So I'm a decent lawyer. I thought I knew what I was doing. I went to searching for the law of the river, assuming that it was in Arizona revised statutes or the U.S. Code annotated or somewhere that I could find. Well, the law of the river is kind of like the British Constitution. It's this thing that people who deal with water rights have learned over time that is the assembled knowledge of a bunch of documents and a bunch of court cases, and you can't find it in any one place. That, of course, allows any given lawyer to tell you at any point in time what the law of the river is that may be different than the next time he tells you what the law is. Such is the beauty of the legal system. So I got on the CAP board, and I thought I'd see a lot of the same people I had seen in these contested zoning battles that we would have in front of city council. Not at all. I now am up on the dais looking out into the audience, and I don't recognize anyone because we have for a very long time made water policy and land policy in different places, in different institutions at different times, and they've been fairly separated. So that was my introduction to the water business. What I'm going to talk to you about today, it has a fair amount about water in it. I sort of beefed up the water section because I think Claudia was particularly interested in it. But I got started thinking about the question of whether or not Phoenix is sustainable a while back. And I am at the moment working on a book on this. So you're seeing a little bit of a preview of my thinking about the question of whether or not Phoenix and places like Phoenix can be termed sustainable. And the reason I do this is there's lots of criticism that is made of the post-war American cities. That is, the cities that became big after World War II based on single-family detached homes, based on the automobile as the dominant mode of transportation, based on air travel, and based on shopping centers. Is that a sustainable form of growth? And a lot of criticism, much of it from sort of East Coast views, is that those sorts of cities are not sustainable. I first got started on this in 2006. I'm driving around in my car listening to NPR. I'm an NPR junkie, as many of you probably are, listening to issues being discussed. And as I'm listening to NPR, somebody with a British accent comes on. Of course, anyone with a British accent we assume is smarter than we are. And so I immediately perk up and start listening more carefully. And it's a guy named Simon Winchester, and he has written a book called A Crack at the Edge of the World, which is about the San Francisco earthquake in the early 20th century. And at the end of his talk, the interviewer says, well, are there lessons to be learned from the San Francisco earthquake that we can extrapolate to other cities? And he answers, well, yes, in my opinion, there are 3 American cities that should never have been built: San Francisco, New Orleans, and Phoenix. Now, everybody gets the New Orleans reference because this is right post-Katrina, right after Katrina. Phoenix, he has to go on and explain, because there's no water there. Because there's no water there. I subsequently heard him on PBS, and there he dropped Phoenix and substituted Tucson. My speculation is that someone from the Southern Project got to him and tried to explain the difference between Phoenix and Tucson, so he grasped the difference. He never did indict Las Vegas, because I guess he thinks it's beneath contempt or something, as a place that has money. So anyway, I started thinking about this problem that people want presumptively to think of Phoenix as unsustainable. So let me talk about that issue a little bit. And this is a book by a guy named Bill DeWeese called Great Aridness, that is about the settlement of the arid part of the western United States, that area in Stegner's wonderful phrase, beyond the 100th meridian. If you want to read a book about western water, read Beyond the 100th Meridian. Still one of the most insightful books written about John Wesley Powell's concept of how the West should develop, which was that people should cluster where there was a natural watershed that could support that number of people. An early insight into thinking about sustainability. Well, of course, that's not what happened. If you think about the nature of water, you sort of need 4 basic commodities for human life, right? You need land, you need air, you need sunshine, and you need water. If you got those 4, you kind of make everything else. You need some seeds or something, but those are the basic things you need. Only one of those is easily portable, water. The others are sort of fixed and difficult to import. So that reality is what gave rise to sort of civilization in the West, the ability to move water to places where people were deciding to live, and that created what wasn't really Powell's original notion of how the Bureau of Reclamation should work, but the whole reclamation process that allowed us to settle the West. And so DeWeese, in this book, which is, I think this is 2012, indicts all of that and basically concludes that Arizona, Utah, most of Colorado, a lot of California really is going to dry up and go away, and was a colossal demographic mistake. And as we move into an era of climate challenges, these are the places that are most likely to not survive. This is a book, this is an article that Du Bois wrote in LA Times that begins with the line, "If cities were stocks, you'd short Phoenix." Now, I wrote a response to this that they printed in the LA Times saying, yeah, you know, you think about the cities in the United States that are going to be challenged. If you accept that climate change will create challenges for us, the cities that are going to be most challenged are places that are below sea level or at sea level. The whole lower part of Manhattan will probably be underwater if there's any kind of sea level rise. They're going to be spending $1 trillion to put dikes to protect lower Manhattan. The places where hurricanes are likely to increase, places where tornadoes are likely to increase, and places where we have built cities based on an expectation of a high level of rainfall and there won't any longer be a high level of rainfall. Those are the places that I think are the most threatened. Phoenix is none of those. We have relatively few natural disasters. That is part of the reason why we are seeing insurance call centers like State Farm, I'll take you later, and the big server farms that are going into Chandler where the cloud lives. When you access something on the cloud, you're either talking to India or you're talking to Chandler or something. The reason they do that is we don't have natural disasters. And I think because of that, and because we know how to deal with the challenge of aridity, Phoenix is arguably less challenged than most big American cities going into a future in which climate will be more uncertain. Not Du Bois. So after I wrote a retort to this, he quit speaking to me. He didn't seem to be good at taking criticism. This is sort of the pinnacle of the criticism. This is a book called Bird on Fire, written by a guy named Andrew Ross. Andrew Ross has a Scottish accent. I don't know if that makes you presumptively smarter than a British accent or not, but it's charming. It's a really charming accent. He's a professor at NYU, so he's very East Coast oriented. And the least sustainable city in his title, as you can see from the picture, which was taken on about as ugly a day as one could find in Phoenix, is Phoenix. The entire book is about Phoenix. Now, he doesn't, I've done a bunch of debates with him, and he doesn't even really try to defend Phoenix as the least sustainable city on Earth. Instead, he tends to say, well, maybe it's not, but surely it's one of the least sustainable, and why would you even want to argue about who wins that competition anyway? And most of this is not actually about the water issues or the natural resource issues that Phoenix gets indicted on. It's about political decision-making in Arizona, which he regards as much too conservative. So these are the classic indictments that are made of Phoenix as an unsustainable place. I told you about Simon Winchester and There's No Water. We'll talk about that one first. The second one is that it takes too much energy to live where it's hot, that this was a big mistake for people to live in these incredibly hot places anyway. The third one is there are too many cars and we're too dependent on cars. The fourth one is sprawl, that we are the king of sprawl in the United States. And the last one is Phoenix is just a big Ponzi scheme. So I want to tick through some of these, but I will mostly talk about water. The second one up here, Sustain Lane. This is a really interesting indictment of Phoenix on the water. Sustain Lane was a website that purported to rank the sustainability of all cities in America. And Phoenix fared very badly. This made the front page of the Arizona Republic when it came out. Sustain Lane is gone out of business. Not because of this, I don't think, but their methodology shows some defects. Their methodology was, Phoenix is unsustainable because we move water from far away. They rated Tucson as more sustainable than either Phoenix or Mesa. Mesa was right there with Phoenix. Because Tucson was using groundwater and that was close by. Unbelievable to anyone who's been involved. Absolutely contrary to the last 50 years of water policy in Arizona. We want to use surface water because it's renewable, because it's sustainable. We don't want to use groundwater because it's mined and it's gone and you don't have it anymore. Lost it. There was another study done by a consulting firm called Tetra Tech. Anybody here work for Tetra Tech? Okay, good. I'll go ahead and insult them freely. It's a good firm. It's a civil engineering firm. I've hired them for client projects, but this is this study rated every county in the United States, a daunting task, for water sustainability. And the way they did it was they looked at the amount of water being used in that county and the amount of rainfall that hits that county. And if there was a big delta, they then applied a presumptive climate change metric that rainfall would go down and saw how big the delta got after that. Lo and behold, more water, this is a revelation, more water is used in Maricopa County than falls in rain in Maricopa County. I'm guessing you all knew that. That fact has been true for 1,400 years. The Hohokam used more water here than falls in rain because we are at a collection point. We are where the water comes from the mountains of central Arizona through the valley. They didn't analyze any of that. So this study said Maricopa County was one of the most unsustainable counties in the United States, and that then got picked up by another study, a consulting firm called Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, that rated the risk of municipal bond default and said that some of the highest risk bonds in the United States were Phoenix water bonds, based on the earlier studies. Now, I was telling Claudia, the former dean of the BYU Business School, and some of you may know, Gary Cornea and I are on the board of a mutual fund that buys Arizona municipal bonds. We regard probably among the safest, the safest municipal bonds in Arizona are Solar Project. That is the gold standard of municipal bonds in Arizona. Phoenix water bonds are right close to that. The likelihood of Phoenix defaulting on water bonds is zero. Because this criticism was based on severe misperceptions. That's part of the Ceres study. Here's yet another one. The New York Times is just fascinated with Phoenix. They are convinced that Phoenix is a giant demographic mistake. That anyone living here is both a political nutcase and has been turned into an imbecile by too much sunshine and is just making bad decisions about life. I get very tired of this, and I write lots of things in response to this. So this is a study I did for the Morrison Institute back in about 2011 about the water supply of the Sun Corridor. The Sun Corridor being Phoenix to Tucson, basically. It actually, demographers are arguing about this issue of metropolitan areas in the United States that are emerging. You all know we call this the Phoenix Mesa SMSA, Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area. That means that for a lot of statistical purposes, Phoenix, Mesa, Glendale, Tempe, what we think of as Greater Phoenix is aggregated statistically. Well, what's happening is we're right on the edge of aggregating with Tucson. So it will eventually be called Phoenix-Tucson. Mesa may lose out of being in the name. Well, Mesa's on the verge of being bigger than Tucson as well, so that could change. But the Sun Corridor will be that aggregation. And it makes some sense to do this because Phoenix, Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties are the CAP service area. So that is the one institution that serves all three areas. So this was a study that we did at the Morrison Institute to try to sort of think about the water supply of the Sun Corridor. These were population projections for the Sun Corridor. These are population projections that were out to 2040. This shows the effect of the 2008 projections being updated with a recession that was in full blown in 2011. So it went down, but the projection was still something like 9 million. So one of the questions is there a water supply to support 9 million people? So the first thing, and interestingly, no one had ever tried to do this. No one had ever tried to analyze the aggregated water supply of the Sun Corridor. Because cities are territorial, you know. Mesa has a terrific water portfolio. Surprise does not. And Surprise doesn't want to display too openly that they don't have a great water portfolio. So they don't tend to share a lot of data sometimes. So this was our best guess estimate of what we thought a sustainable water supply in the Sun Corridor was. And you see the sources that are coming in there. The 260,000 foot of groundwater recharge, we use more than that in the Sun Corridor. We are still not at safe yield. That's what the Groundwater Management Act passed in 1980 was supposed to mandate, that we only take so much water out of the ground as naturally gets back in the ground. We're not there. One of the So one of the things I want you all as Arizonans to leave here with is a sort of sense of missionary zeal. Good words when you're talking to an audience from BYU. About Arizona and the fact that it is too sustainable and that we are not in desperate water shape. Indeed, metropolitan Phoenix is better in terms of water supply than any major city in the arid West. Better than Los Angeles, better than San Diego, better than Las Vegas by a large margin. Denver, Albuquerque, all of them are closer to having consumed their water supply than we are. The reason is farming. The reason is we still use more than half of the water in the Senate order for growing crops. Now, I don't think we should get rid of growing crops. I think that's one of the mistakes we make in Arizona water policy, is assuming all that water can be converted to urban uses. Urban water use is different than agricultural water use. Urban water use, you can't take it away in times of drought. You can't tell people you're not getting water this month. You can do that to a farmer, to a degree, depending on what kind of crops they have. So anyway, this was our attempt to look at the water supply. We then did make a climate change assumption. This was based on the best estimates we could get from NOAA and from USBR at the time. So we said, all right, if that's the inputs to the system of water every year, that 2.8 million, let's make a reduction based on the assumption that climate change is real and is going to happen and we're going to have to live with less. I will tell you, if I were to redo this study today, this was 2011, I would up that 15% number. I would make a greater reduction of that. And I'll show you a slide at the end of this that talks about that. So this is the principal point, that if you are trying to explain why Arizona, why Phoenix is different than other cities, that I want you to understand. We have built watering systems based on a high degree of variability. Some years it rains a lot, some years it doesn't rain very much. Some years there's a lot of snow in the Mogollon Rim, some years there's not. Some years there's a lot of snow in the Rockies and not any on the Mogollon Rim. There are all these variables. Any of you who live near a desert wash, you know, sometimes there's a lot of water in that wash, but it lasts for 20 minutes and then it's gone. That degree of variability has been true from the earliest days of this place. And so the line up there is input, is water flowing into the SRP system. The bars are deliveries by the SRP system. The bars are very stable. The line is very jagged. What we have done is to take a significant amplitude of variability in our water system and smooth it out through a variety of mechanisms. Climate change would increase the amplitude of variability, but we would go from this kind of an amplitude to this kind of an amplitude. We can cope with that. About 5 years ago, Atlanta, where you think it rains a lot, and it usually does, Atlanta has built a water system for their metropolitan area based on a 0 degree of variability, based on 40 to 60 inches of rain, at least 40 inches of rain every year. 1 year it didn't. Atlanta was down to 28 days worth of water in storage. In metropolitan Phoenix, if we have less than 4 years worth of total water supply and storage, we get panicky. That's what Roosevelt Lake is about. That's what Bartlett Lake is about. That's what all of those are about. In order to increase our reliability against this high degree of variability, we've been putting water back underground. Nowhere else in the world does this to the degree we do. We have put 8 million acre feet. I use acre feet a lot. When you're in the water biz, you get used to acre foot. An acre foot is 325,000 gallons. It is about what your families probably use between half an acre foot and an acre foot of water a year for your family. New subdivisions in Phoenix, smaller lots, more desert landscaping, closer to half an acre foot. Older lots in the flood irrigated areas of Mesa or Tempe, probably more than an acre foot. On average, we're using about half an acre foot right now. So we put 8 million acre feet underground in the last 15 years. Nobody's done anything like this in the rest of the world. And we sort of don't, most people don't even know about it. That is drought protection. So that's the variability question. This shows that the Groundwater Management Act, despite the fact that we didn't get to safe yield, we're doing pretty well. Where we're not doing as well is in Pinal County. Tucson never used as much because Tucson doesn't have agriculture. Maricopa, most of that decline in agriculture is because of urbanization. It is true that on balance, a section of houses will use less water than a section of alfalfa or cotton. This is sort of shows you that despite the enormous population growth between 1957 and 2011, aggregate water use in the state has gone down. It's because of the retirement of agriculture. There are not very many places that could show that. So this was trying to figure out, okay, how many people could you build into the Sun Corridor based on the water supply? So if you take the 2 billion acre foot water supply, remember I showed you 2.8 million, and then I showed you a reduction of 2.4 million. Now I'm down to 2.2, 2.0, or 1.8. Then you have to make the GPCD assumption about how much, GPCD is gallons per capita per day, how much water each person is using. Right now, we found in the Sun Corridor that we were right around 200. Tucson's much lower than that. Tucson's much more efficient than Phoenix. But, Tucson's kind of ugly, so it looks kind of dry. And, if you really just want a front yard that has nothing but automobiles parked in it, okay, it doesn't use much water. Okay, somebody's from Tucson. So this sort of shows you how water is currently being used. Of that supply, we're currently using about 1.3 million acre feet for urban uses. So we have something like 2.4, we're using something like 1.3. The difference is agriculture. So I said before, I don't think we should get rid of agriculture, but it gives us enormous flexibility and buffer in going into the future. So if you converted the whole water supply to people, that's what you have over here. So you will hear people say, we can support 12 million people in the Sun Corridor. That's what that bottom figure says. That assumes the maximum on water supply and the minimum on gallons per capita today and no agriculture at all. That's not a good scenario, but it's theoretically possible. And it's frankly not a lot different than Los Angeles or Las Vegas. That's essentially what they've done, is used all their water supply to support an urban population. Las Vegas got screwed when the river was split up. They didn't get much water, and so that's why they're in much worse trouble. This is a little bit out of the sequence and irrelevant, but it's an interesting issue. The issue that's shown here is water rates. So this is ranking the cities, the big cities in America, as to how much water costs. You will see that Phoenix is right in the middle. It may feel to you, if you have a big swimming pool on the grass, like water here costs a lot. It really doesn't. It is going to get more expensive, and it needs to get more expensive. Tucson does aggressive block pricing, so the more you use, the more you pay. We don't do that in the Phoenix area much. Because if we did, the landscape that we're all used to here would die. People would quit watering their lawns and even their trees. And that's, from a sociological perspective and from a heat island perspective, that's probably not a result you want to encourage all that much. Interesting thing on there, the most expensive city on there is Seattle. Now the least expensive is Chicago. Obvious, right? Big lake, right there, close by, no reason to charge a lot, you're not moving it far. Why is Seattle so expensive? Because they don't use very much water. This is ranking the cost. And since they don't use very much, they can charge a lot for it. The reason they don't use very much, it rains. Water in Seattle is not used for landscaping. Here, landscaping is about half of the water consumption as a home is outside the home. So this one I showed just to show sort of the choices going forward. This is sort of typical Phoenix on the left, typical Tucson if you're really willing to look at Tucson through rose-colored glasses on the right. I'm an ASU guy. I have to make brief remarks about Tucson. Michael Pro requires that if we want to keep our contracts. So the issue of water here is we're not running out anytime soon. People are always asking me sort of, when are we going to run out of water? And do we have enough water? And that is the exact equivalent of it is if I ask one of you, does your family have enough money? When are you going to run out of money? It's the same questions. It's all about what assumptions do you make? How do you want to live? When are you going to retire? What do you want to do with the money you have? Do you want to have expensive travel in your retirement, or are you going to cut back? And water's the same way. You just have to develop a budget, and you have to think about the way you use it. The message of all this is we have to think more carefully going forward. Now let me run through the other indictments briefly. So this notion that we use too much energy, there was a study that came out done by the University of Michigan about 2 years ago that compared Sunbelt cities with cold region cities on an energy use metric. They didn't use Phoenix, they used Miami and Minneapolis. Minneapolis, on a per capita basis, consumes 3 times as much energy as Miami. It takes more energy to heat than it does to cool because heat pumps are relatively efficient. Arizona in general is low on an energy consumption metric, and there are a couple reasons for that. One is we don't have a lot of heavy industry like steel mills. And the other is we have heat pumps, which are pretty efficient and pretty good consumers, and we change the temperature gradient from 115 to 80 less than you change it when it's 10 below zero when you want it to be 70. And so the aggregate amount of energy consumed to make that degree change is significantly less. The second thing is the carbon metric. The carbon footprint of Arizonans is actually relatively low. Again, I burn a lot of fires at my house when we don't have no burn days because I like fireplaces, but by and large we don't do a lot of that. And we don't do the worst thing you can do for carbon, which is burn diesel fuel oil in your basement, which is how much of the Midwest is heated. So it is simply wrong to assume that Phoenix and Phoenicians and people in Arizona are profligate consumers of energy that create lots of greenhouse gases and problems. 25% below the nation. The next indictment is the car indictment. Now, it is true that we are heavily reliant on automobiles because Metro Phoenix became a big city only after people owned cars. We didn't build up based on streetcar lines or other kinds of commuting patterns. But frankly, most of the U.S. is now. If you live in Manhattan, you may not need a car. If you live in downtown San Francisco, you may not need a car, and a few other places. And this is beginning to change, and there is all this evidence that millennials are not as interested in driving cars as my generation was. But if you simply look at the congestion that is caused by cars and the amount of time people spend in their cars, Phoenix is not anywhere near the top on that metric. Now, most of the reason is we have this incredibly forgiving grid of streets that are here because this was a farming town. That's why Phoenix is here. This is a big farming town. This is Fresno on steroids. And that forgiving grid of streets means if you hit a traffic jam on Main Street or Apache Boulevard, you can divert to University. You can pick a different way to get somewhere. And that's a much more flexible system than most places. We came very late to freeways, but we've done a pretty good job of building them. And despite the fact that you feel like you're stuck in traffic jams, as I know I'm going to feel as I leave here and speed toward the ASU Law School because of light rail construction, we actually spend much less time in traffic jams than most places, and less time in our cars, and therefore we pollute less from our cars than most of the other big cities. This is the sprawl indictment, and I wrote a book about Phoenix in 1999 that dealt mainly with this question. This is a hugely misunderstood issue. People in the New York Times and on the East Coast and on NPR and on PBS, all of which I read and enjoy, hugely misunderstand the nature of Phoenix. They think Phoenix is the king of sprawl development, and we're really not. We tend to develop on the edge of town at relatively high densities. Think about next time you fly out of here and you fly somewhere else. As you fly into Cleveland or Indianapolis or even the cities of the Pacific Northwest, you will see people living at very low densities, all surrounding those metropolitan areas, and then it gets slowly more and more dense as you get near the metropolitan area. When you come home, look out the window at Phoenix, and you will see a hard edge of the urban form. That's where the pipes in. That's where there isn't any more water, and until it's extended, we won't build beyond that. The Groundwater Management Act doesn't let you just go outside and drill a well, live, if you're in an active management area. So what has happened in Phoenix is we've expanded in a relatively orderly form. There are exceptions to this, but we don't tend to leapfrog way out. And we don't have very, very low density development. Rich people in Phoenix live on an acre. You know, you probably know people who live on 2 acres or 5 acres. East Valley's a little bit lower density in that regard at the upper stratum of income levels. But even the richest people in Paradise Valley live on 5 acres. If you're really wealthy and live outside Atlanta, the odds are very high you're living on 80 acres. You have a farm on the outskirts of Atlanta. I was doing a case years ago with a lawyer friend of mine from Atlanta. During the course of the case, he moved from his 80-acre mansion outside Atlanta to a 50-story residential high-rise in downtown Atlanta. We don't have either of those. We have no high-rises that tall. At the time this case was going on, we only have 3 residential high-rises. And nobody lives on 80 acres and commutes into Phoenix. You can't do it. There is no such lifestyle. We live in a much more constrained range of density. So this is a statistic by the quintessential East Coast think tank, the Brookings Institution, looking at the efficiency with which cities convert land to new development. The national average is it takes 2 acres of land for every new home that's built. In Phoenix, it's closer to 2/10 of an acre that is consumed for every new home that's built. Because we build relatively small lots and our density is increasing all the time. The other city that fares really well on this metric is Las Vegas. Las Vegas and Phoenix are becoming increasingly dense all the time. Phoenix was not a big city before the automobile. So when you hear people talk negatively about sprawl, what they're mostly talking about is taking a classic streetcar type city or rail commuting type city, be it Chicago, be it Philadelphia, be it Detroit, whatever, and redistributing the population from the era that was pre-auto to a much less dense population post-auto. So places like Philadelphia lost 1/3 of their population but doubled in size as they redistributed the density of where they live. That's not true in Phoenix. Phoenix has gotten steadily more dense every year since it was first urbanized because we didn't have a lot of people before the automobile. So I think this is a largely misunderstood indictment of Phoenix as well. The last indictment is that Phoenix is just one giant Ponzi scheme. Well, you know, there's some truth to this one. I have to concede a little bit here. Our economy is largely built around convincing people to move here from somewhere else and buy real estate. That has been our great success, is convincing Midwesterners that they really don't need to live back there anymore, come out here, bring your capital with you, bring your business with you, but come here because we have sunshine and cheap houses. That's the fundamental basis of this place, sunshine and cheap housing. And there is some truth to the fact that if all your community is doing is selling real estate to each other, maybe your economy is insufficiently diversified. So I'm willing to accept some of the criticism on this basis. But even on this basis, Phoenix is more diverse than people think. Oh yeah, the numbers are there. So this is a diversity standard that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics applies for the diversity of the economy of the place. The national economy is a 1.0. So if you have all the diversity of the United States, you're a 1.0. Phoenix comes in at a 0.79. It's less than diverse than the national economy. Well, yeah, that makes sense. You can't be as diverse as all of America in terms of where people work, what kinds of jobs they have. But 0.79 is pretty high. It is higher, as I said here, than Los Angeles or New York City or Philadelphia or San Francisco. Now, if you think about it, the reason that Phoenix is more diverse on that metric is this is a community of small businesses. We have lots and lots of small businesses. I told somebody earlier this week, there's one statistic I have seen, I cannot vouch for the validity, that says one of the 2 or 3 largest concentrations of small machine shops in the United States is the area right around Sky Harbor. Who knows? I don't know if it's true or not. But our economy is not dominated by a single industry like aerospace is in Seattle. Now they have aerospace and software. Los Angeles has aerospace and entertainment. New York has financial transactions and financial services. We could use more of that. To the extent we are dominated by a single industry, it's real estate development. But real estate development isn't a base industry, it's a sort of secondary or derivative industry. People are doing other things, and that creates the need for real estate development. So even on this measure, I don't think we are as unsustainable as we are sometimes painted to be. So that's a preview. I have a contract with a publisher called Island Press to write this book about the sustainability of Phoenix and places like Phoenix, which is to say the post-war New American suburban style cities. I refuse to, because this is my place. I've lived here my whole life. I love it here. I'm not going anywhere. I refuse to sort of accept the notion that we are any necessarily worse or less sustainable than other cities in the country. And so I want you to all get that message. I did this presentation, or a variation on this presentation a while back, for a group from out of town. I do this with people out of town sometimes too, and they are like completely shocked by many of these statistics because they absolutely believe that Phoenix is the most sprawling city in America, the lowest density city in America, and it doesn't have any water. And we use way too much energy to air condition our houses. The group I did this for, this was interesting, it's called the Deep Foundations Institute. I showed up the day of the talk, assuming that meant they were into like transcendental meditation and chanting, and that this would be kind of an interesting group, which would be, oddly dressed and want to really be engaged with you and stuff. No, these are people who dig really deep holes and fill them with concrete and rebar. They were the Deep Foundations Institute. They were so different than what I had expected. These are engineers from all over the world. I did the same presentation with them and got the same reaction. They were all like, wow, we have no idea. So that's it. I think I can still make class, but I might have time for a question or two if you want to do. Anybody? Follow-ups, questions, reactions? You all want me to make class. I appreciate that. Yes.
If we have another housing market downturn in the somewhat near future, how do you see that affecting?
Well, I think I don't think we're going to have another severe downturn. I think we're on a long, slower growth path that I don't think we're going to ever get back to the 2007, 2008 stuff. I'm fine with that. I think it's better we not get there because of this desire to diversify our economy. I think we're getting better on most of these methods. I don't think we're going to suffer another severe downturn. And the reason I don't think that is my office is kind of a leading indicator because we're hired by developers to get big projects approved. We are swamped with work. But it's not home building. It's office buildings in Tempe, offices and apartments in downtown Phoenix. It's hotels. It's a manufacturing plant on the west side that's going to employ a bunch of people. I think we are maturing as a place to be less dependent on movement. And I think that's a good thing. So I think we may see a slight blip, but I think we're going to rock along like this. And I think it would be far better if we rocked along like this, home building at the 10 to 15,000 unit a year level in Maricopa County, instead, or in Metro Phoenix, rather than the 30,000 units, 5,000 units, 30,000 units that we've done in the past. That's very hard to manage your way through. So, okay, thanks.